So what is the DCED Standard? The DCED Standard is an 8-part framework for effective results measurement. It enables programs to measure to better measure the results they're getting, to manage their programs in order to improve these results and demonstrate these results to external parties, to donors, whoever they're interested in. It has taken off really in the last 2 years, and it is now used by over 100 projects in over 50 countries. The small map to the side is our attempt at representing this, and if you go onto our website, you can find a clickable version of this map, which will allow you to see who is using the standard near your organization, near your country. So why use the DCED standard? The first thing to say is really that it's a practical framework. It wasn't written by academics or by donors, but by implementing staff wrestling with the challenges of doing good results measurement to a reasonable cost in a private sector development program. And what they realized is that good monitoring helps to understand the context in which they're working, the rapidly changing market systems, and generate the information which they need to improve performance. So it allows programs to report consistent results. It allows programs to get similar indicators across interventions, which can then be aggregated, and also credible results, because it requires a certain robustness to the results measurement system. Results can be trusted by external parties. And there's a possibility for an external audit function. The monitoring system can be audited by external consultants, which kind of helps to build the credibility of the results you're reporting. Competition break. What does the DCED stand for? Type in as quickly as possible. And we will leave a few seconds to see if anyone knows what the DCED actually stands for. Ah, brilliant. We have an answer from Gail Barnett, who is today. Oh, Natalie coming in a close second. Yes, both correctly highlighted. It stands for Donor Committee for Enterprise Development. So well done, Gail. A quick virtual round of applause, please. David, well done, but I'm afraid an honourable third place. Okay, thank you very much. So the DCED standard has 8 elements, 8 parts to the framework. The first element is to develop the results chain. And the results chain is a tool you may be familiar with, but it's a really simple idea. It's a chain of expected changes moving from program actions to goal level impacts. So if you look at the diagram on the right, at the bottom you'll see little pink boxes. These are the actions, what the program is actually doing. At the top you'll see the impact, what the program hopes to achieve. And the results chain really goes into the details of the intermediate steps, trying to clarify why trying to clarify the changes in behavior and in attitudes of the different stakeholders along the chain, which will lead to the income increasing. So in this example, if you train retailers, you would perhaps expect them to improve the quality of the advice they give. You would expect farmers to take on that advice and adjust their farming practices, increase their yield, and so improve their incomes. So this helps improve program clarity and design. It forces people to think about the changes they expect to see and ask whether it's really likely that these changes are enough to achieve the impact. And it also provides the basis for assessing to what extent these changes are taking place, so the foundation for the monitoring and evaluation system. Here is a fictional example, which is perhaps not dissimilar to what you do find in some programs. You have very clear activities along the bottom, where it says you train government staff, you organize workshops, you have a very clear goal, increase in exports to Europe. But it's not clear what's in the blue box. It doesn't unpack the miracle. So it doesn't unpack what kind of changes in policy or changes in attitudes, behavior are needed in order to increase exports. So that's the first element. The second 2 elements define and measure indicators. Indicators need to be derived from the logic of the results chain. So they allow you to see if change is happening at every step. And what this means is once you've got your results chain set up, the results chain says what you want to see. So for every step along the way, you set an indicator in order to see whether it's happening or not. And this makes sure that your measurement is closely tied to your theory, to your results chain, and so is more likely to be relevant to what you're seeing, to what you're doing, and allows you to test the results chain as you go to see whether your initial theory was right and actually happens or not. So indicators tend to be quantitative, but it's also essential to collect qualitative information, which tells the story of how and why the indicators are changing. Okay, so that's steps 2 and 3. Obviously, you can go into more detail about what is a good measurement system, what is good enough measurement, but that is unfortunately for another webinar. But please ask questions about that or anything else if you would like us to expand on it later. Element 4 is assessing attribution. So attribution is a challenging thing to do, but it's a relatively easy concept to understand. It just means for every change, let's say farmers increased their yield, what was the reason for this change? Was it because of the intervention? Was it because the weather improved, because there were changes in the educational system, or any other number of reasons that the change you observed could have occurred? So attribution is the attempt to untangle the reasons for changes. And this can happen at every level in the results chain. So in a typical private sector development program, at the top you have your impact, and you want to know, was this impact due to the changes due to our intervention? But also at the bottom, you might have like a change in the company as an output. You gave grant funding to a company which then went and started a new innovative project. And you want to know whether that new behavior from the company is attributable to your intervention, or whether they would have done it anyway, but were just very happy to receive grant funding in order to do it. So attribution is an issue at all levels. So good practice in attribution, programs often find it challenging, and I think Alison will talk about this a bit later. The DCED standard requires good enough measurement approaches. So it doesn't require perfect assessments of attribution. It doesn't require, for example, an experimental control in every situation, but it does require that programs think about it and do the best they can in their circumstances. So this could be through tracing changes through the results chain, which means that you look at the change at every level and gather evidence to support the fact that these changes have happened, and then gather qualitative information to support the links between the levels. So you would ask farmers, why have their yields increased? You would ask businesses, why did you do this new business model? And see whether they attribute what they have observed to your intervention or to other factors. But typically a mix of methods will be needed, both qualitative and quantitative. Qualitative methods we've discussed, stakeholder opinions, participatory methods, but quantitative methods are also important, and this can be, for example, using control groups or analyzing trends if you have good enough data, a range of possibilities. Okay, quick competition break. How many elements are in the DCED standard for results measurement? Please type as quickly as you can. Ooh, okay, I guess David gets half points for being first, but unfortunately not quite right. David said 4, MDB said 4, but Natalie is the winner who said 8. There are 8 elements, although congratulations on paying attention. I've only described 4 of them so far, so I guess this can count as a trick question. Okay, just a sec. Pratvia is having problems with her headset, and Eleanor will reply to you. Okay, so the 5th element, moving on, is systemic change. And systemic change is the requirement to look at changes in market systems, as well as the direct impact of your program. For example, let's say you support a seed supplier which starts selling seed in an area. Element 5 would require you to look not just at the direct seed supplier, but also at other seed suppliers to see if they were copying or replicating the innovation, to look at financial service providers to see if they were providing finance to farmers to buy seed, and looking at the wider environment. This is challenging, often controversial, exactly what we mean by assessing systemic change, and so this is a recommended element rather than a mandatory part of the DCED standard. We had a webinar on this quite recently, which is now available on our website if you want more details on this element. The next two elements are relatively simple, tracking costs and reporting results. Tracking costs is a simple, every program does it, and it's just the obvious fact that there are two programs that achieve the same results. One of them costs £100,000, one of them costs £100 million, are actually very different programs. So the DCED standard requires that you track your costs. And programs should produce a report, at least annually, which describes their results to date. Managing the system for results measurement. This is perhaps the most important and hardest element of the standard, and it basically requires programs to use the information that they're gathering to adjust their approach as they implement. And this can be from changing the activities you're doing to changing the entire logic of the intervention. So changing the results chain in response to what you're finding through your monitoring. And in order to do this, the organizational culture really needs to encourage program staff to be honest and transparent with the results that they report, rather than encouraging them just to get the biggest numbers to feed the monitoring system. So it can sometimes include quite a change in what programs are doing. Brilliant, that is the 8 elements. I've just got a couple of extra slides. The first is to talk about the audits. So it's worth saying audits are firstly optional. You can use the DCED standard without audits. And secondly, they are confidential. So audit reports aren't shared except with the permission of the program. And in order to audit, the auditor will come along and look at each element of the DCED standard against a standardized grid of criteria, which is available on our website. So they'll show the control points, which are the objectives, and compliance criteria, which are almost the indicators for how well the program monitoring system is performing. So finally, why should you be interested in the DCED standard? I think the DCED standard is basically useful for improving the effectiveness of your program. So through the results chain, it helps programs articulate what they're doing and think very clearly about whether they are likely to achieve the results and whether they need to change anything about what they're doing. It brings the potential to use the results you gather to improve the programs and have a greater impact. And in doing so, it brings recognition as being seriously engaged in results measurement and interested in the effectiveness of your program. And the DCED standard is increasingly demanded by donors, and a selection of recent bids, for example, have come out which do require the DCED standard to be included. So thank you for listening. There are a couple of online resources here. There is our main webpage. You can find all specific guidance notes for each one of the elements, and the 2014 reader on results measurement acts as kind of a summary, and I think 20-page report which just summarizes the key stages in a bit more detail, gives examples and case studies. And I'll now hand over to Alison, who is going to talk about her experience using the DCED standard in Grow Liberia.
Hi, everybody. So just to get us started here, I'll give you a little bit of background. So I'm representing the Grow program in Liberia. We're a program implementing the DCED standard for results measurement. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about, building on what Adam said, how we operationalize and use the DCED standard in our program. So we'll give you a little overview of the program. I'll talk about how we use it on a practical day-to-day basis, give you a little bit of background on some of the challenges that we face and also some of the strategies that we're adopting to address those challenges. So Grow at a glance. Grow is a 5-year Swedish SIDA-funded Making Markets Work for the Poor program in Liberia. And we started implementation in June of 2014. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar with M4P or Making Markets Work for the Poor, it's a market development program and a program strategy that we use, which focuses on facilitation, supporting partners in the market rather than directly intervening, and is highly focused on adopting and changing what we do as we implement the program. So it's a nice partner to the DCED standard for results measurement. While most DCED programs focus solely on the economic impacts and maybe some additional other impacts that their programs seek to achieve, we at the highest level are focused on both increasing incomes, and we also have a dual purpose. So we're focused on promoting stability within Liberia. As you know, Liberia is a post-conflict country, and so we're looking at what are the levers that have to do with decreasing risks of conflict and promoting stability, and how we can intervene to support those. Finally, we're a consortium program, so we're led by Adam Smith International, and we have other partners on board as well. Those include Mercy Corps, who I happen to work for, Springfield Center, and SIPU, a Swedish organization. So, as promised, I said, we would talk a little bit about how Grow operates on a daily basis. And one of the things that I want to focus on is actually how we're structured as a team. Something that's important to highlight is that results measurement and management is actually all about your team. So how you measure and understand the information that lets you react to your intervention really depends on who it is that you have looking at that information and how they use it. So our team has been structured from the beginning to align with the DCED standard. And what we've created, actually, when it comes to a particular intervention, is a buddy system, where we have a portfolio manager who is responsible for driving the activities of the intervention forward, and they are paired up with a market analyst, who's someone who's a part of the monitoring and evaluation team, or the monitoring and results measurement team. And they're responsible for making sure that we have the data coming into the system and that we can use it for decision making. So in all of our activities and in the management of our interventions, we really rely on this core buddy system. How are the portfolio managers and the market analysts meeting, communicating, and working together on a daily basis to both implement and to understand intervention? And then within that team, the market analyst is overseen by the Director of Results Management, which is my position. And of course, then the whole team sits underneath the team leader. So, in practice, how do we operate at Grow? Within Grow, our team would tell you we're really all about results change. This is our mantra. And Adam gave an overview of results chains, and I think there are so many different formats for logics and programs that it's easy to just sort of say, oh yeah, okay, this is the next thing. But I want to speak to you a little bit about what it is that we like about results chains within Grow. First of all, we like that they make theories of change nonlinear, and they make them something that's adaptive and can change. The reality of the world is something that's nonlinear. Frequently in program log frames, we have activities, outputs, outcomes, and impacts. However, when you're trying to manage or implement a program, that type of structure actually doesn't necessarily accurately reflect the complexity that you see in the world around you. So accordingly, we encourage having feedback loops and arrows that connect different boxes at different levels together. The visual that I have up here now is actually a higher level results chain. But we also actually use a different structure from standard logics as well. And this is something that is well suited particularly to an M4P or market development program. So basically what we think of is we work as facilitators in the market. So what we're trying to do is change the market system. So we work directly with partners or market players, And we have outputs related to those partners or market players, but we also have the level of our target beneficiaries. Much better. Okay, great. So just to recap on that because of the background noise, what it looks like is basically what we have is that we're trying to induce changes in behavior in market players, who then can induce changes in behavior in market beneficiaries. So the way that we talk about this is we see that market as an engine of the market. So the question that I'm always asking our team is how are we supporting the long-run changes in the market engine? We see that market system as the engine. So how are we feeding into people like agri-dealers or the government, those partners, in a way that they can continue on an ongoing basis to serve our target group? So, you know, the difference between maybe a traditional program and an M4P program is rather than, you know, giving seeds directly or seeds or advice directly, we would promote agri-dealers or input retailers to stock better seeds and to provide advice to farmers directly, so that in the future, ongoing, and that's why we have the multiple arrows here in the visual, we'll see that those changes can continue to sustain in the market system. So the visual I was showing you before was a little bit of a higher level of results chains, and this is actually one of the detailed results chains from our intervention. And I wanted to throw this up here. I know you can't see the details of it right now, but these results chains, sometimes they get a little bit complex. They have a lot of feedback loops, and what's important to pay attention to is actually the fact that this can be a detailed roadmap for your intervention. So the way that we basically use this system is we use stoplights. You'll see that in this visual we have the green, the yellow, and the red here on some of these boxes. So to go into a little bit more depth and zoom in here, we use this as a management tool. So you can see at the bottom we have activities. If an activity is complete and it's successful, then it's green. If it's in process, or maybe there are a few questions we have about it, then it's yellow. And then if it's not going well, or if we've failed to complete it, then it would be red. And so as a result of that, then you can see that from our activities, we measure upwards and we say, okay, how are these leading to the market system changes that we're seeking to promote? So Adam touched a little bit on attribution and the fact that you want to follow the links and the logic of the results chain. And one of the things that is helpful about the stoplight system is that it allows you to see. You cannot turn a box above a lower box to green unless the box below it is green. So you see over on the right-hand side, we have a box that's red, an activity that has not happened or did not happen on time. If something's red, that means that we can't attribute what's happened further up on the results chain to our program. The other thing that's really nice about this is that it's very simple and visual. It's very easy to get bogged down in the details of the numbers and the quantities and your indicators. But after all of that, and we do use that information and we look at it seriously, but this roadmap really actually helps the team to have a sense of progress and success and an easy way of communicating with each other about whether or not things are on track. This is actually one of the things that our team says they like best about using results chains. And so from there, I actually want to dig a little bit deeper. You know, I've covered a lot about results chains and our team structure. And as Adam said, one of the most difficult control points is managing the system for results measurement. How do you make sure that you're actually implementing interventions that use the information that comes from the monitoring system to make decisions? The way that we operate at Grow is that we have created what we call an intervention management tool, which serves as the central resource for managing our interventions. And that means, as I showed you on the earlier slide, it's all about the communication and the interaction between the implementers, the portfolio managers, and the market analysts on the MRM team. Now, you know, I lay out that clear distinction, but something that's interesting to note actually is that in order for this system to work effectively, you need the portfolio managers to be involved in M&E, and you need the market analysts also to be involved sometimes in implementing activities directly. So we see these lines as sometimes blurred, but what's important is to still have sort of clear lines of accountability and responsibility. So this intervention management tool that we have, it's an Excel-based tool. It's not overly complicated. Sometimes we find that using complicated software actually is difficult, particularly in contexts where computers break down. There are lots of viruses. I'm sure those of you in the field are nodding along. So what we have is this one tool, and we make sure that it's what's used for work planning, for setting out the results chain, for measuring whether or not things are working, and for tracking what we've learned and how we've changed things. So what I've highlighted at the bottom of the screen is just some of the tabs that we have in this tool. Starts with the center, the results chain. Then it looks at work planning and what are some of the questions that we're asking in field and what are some of our observations. The portfolio managers oversee that portion. And then when it comes to the measurement plan, projecting our results and measuring them and doing some of those background calculations that may be included, that's the market analyst area. But all of these are included in the same file, which is on our server. And the team is responsible for making sure that in weekly meetings and monthly meetings and in quarterly reviews that they keep this updated so that they can communicate with each other, and so management can also see how different interventions are coming along and progressing. So finally, then, I wanted to touch a little bit on how we incorporate stability into the GROW program. Now, this is actually a new area, and one of the areas that DCED is exploring a little bit further, has been exploring a little bit further in recent years. So we're testing how is it that we can use stability within the framework of the DCED standard for results measurement. And as I showed you on an earlier slide, we're all about the market engine within GROW. So what is it that we are promoting that is that sustainable change in the market that will continue on an ongoing basis to impact our target beneficiaries? So what I have up here on the screen is our theory of change and our results chain for stability across the GROW program. So based on some of the analysis we did in our design phase, we basically drew together this theory of change. So what are those changes that we want to continue to promote so that they can continue to impact beneficiaries? We want to make sure that target groups have improved access to goods and services that will allow them to generate income. We want to make sure that we're improving policies and civic engagement, and we also want to make sure that we're increasing accountability and transparency. One of the things that DCED Standard emphasizes is the need to sort of project the potential impact of an intervention, and then as a result, be able to measure against that so you can understand what's working and what's not. When it comes to stability, actually what we do is we do a screening at the start of an intervention. And so we look at, whether or not we're going to be promoting stability, but we also at a base level want to make sure that our interventions pay attention to do no harm principles. So that's just a quick note on stability within GROW. Finally, then, just moving to challenges. As Adam highlighted, measuring attribution can be a challenge because, we oftentimes think of things like randomized control trials, things that involve treatment and control groups, but it doesn't necessarily have to be that complicated. Then you have measuring systemic change. How do you get to indirect impacts? And then also, having an adaptive system means that revisions are happening constantly. So planning and updates, there's something that happens, almost every day and could potentially be burdensome. So how do we deal with that? When it comes to measuring attribution, we come back to our stoplight system. So let's follow the logic of the results chain. Has the box before occurred? And then we look at our qualitative information. Well, what were the factors that have allowed this change, this results chain box, to change in color? And was that as a result of us, GROW, or was it other factors? Sometimes that can be done through complex studies, but it can also be done sometimes through some simple question asking and just really sort of interrogating your intervention. Ultimately, we're all about thinking critically about whether or not our interventions are working, and so this approach really helps you be practical about attribution. Then measuring systemic change. While we're still early in our intervention, what we take is a phased approach. So right now we're focused on core activities, where we'll get to the point of trying to understand more detail our intervention indirect impact, but that's something that needs to happen a little bit further down the line. So it's important to stay focused on what aspect of your results chain you're measuring now. Finally, on the level of the complexity of constantly having to revise, we found that it helps to have a schedule. When is it that we make sure that revisions occur so that our team doesn't feel the burden that they need to change everything every day? So we have a quarterly review process that's in place. So on that note, we will turn it over to the questions portion, and I will pass the mic back to Adam.
Alison, thank you so much. That was very interesting, and I think we got almost all of it. Thanks to someone's noisy background. Anyway, it's working well. We've had several questions, so I'll try and share them out among us so we can quickly rattle through them. Adam, we've had a question: what's different about the DCED standard relative to other widely used M&E systems? Adam, maybe you want to pick that up.
Okay, thanks, Jim, and thanks, Alison, for your presentation. So it's a question we get a lot, and the simple answer is that there is nothing in the DCED standard which has not been in other M&E systems for years. So the idea of setting up a logic model, whether it's a log frame or a results chain or whatever, and then monitoring indicators based on that, has been around for a long time. So the DCED standard, I think, is unique, firstly, in the fact it systematizes this. It puts it into a framework which can be quite easily applied, well, relatively easily applied by programs, and can then be audited. So that's different about it. The focus on systemic change is also something you don't find in typical monitoring systems. But really, I think it's the fact that it's taken standard M&E good practice and put it into a very clear framework, which is the only major difference.
Okay, thanks. Alison, a question from David, who I'm guessing is from Mercy Corps. What has been the most successful criteria so far that Grow uses to ensure that you facilitate inclusive markets that benefit the poor? So how are you assessing whether you're reaching the poor or the very poor? Oh, you need to turn your mic on. There we go.
Okay, great. So this is a really good question. The way that we approach this is it really depends on what stage you're at in an intervention. So in Grow, we actually have a number of different sectors. Currently, we're in rubber, in oil palm, and in vegetables. And so we actually start with a sector screening. So we look at the opportunity within the sector. Where are the poor? What roles do they play within that sector? And then what is the feasibility of us impacting the poor within that sector, which also has to do with overall sector growth and things like this. So after selecting which sectors have the poor, where the poor are placed and placed in roles that we think we can impact, then we get to the level of different interventions. And so, at the outset of the program, we designed against within our log frame how it is that we wanted to define who the poor are. And so we did it basically based on an income requirement. But other programs have done this based on land size or proxies or other things as well. And so the way that we make sure that we continue assessing that is looking at what are the baseline incomes of our beneficiaries, and then how is it that we're able to change them. So within specific interventions, we also follow the same process that we did at the sector level. When considering a specific intervention, we need to understand how it is that we'll actually get to the poor. So, I mentioned briefly impact projections and the way that we aligned at the outset of the intervention what we think we can achieve. And this actually is really critical in us quantifying what is our pro-poor impact. So our log frame indicators are attributable income for the poor, and the number of poor whose incomes increase at that highest level. So we do calculations. We look at our market assumptions. We look at how much we may be able to increase yields and for how many people. And then we measure against that to see whether or not we're on track. Back over to you guys.
Yep, that sounds fantastic. Thank you very much. Next, Adam, you want to add anything on that? Yes.
Yeah, just briefly, in another program I'm involved in, we use the Progress Out of Poverty Index, which is a way of basically measuring poverty, given that measuring poverty through incomes is very difficult, because if you ask the average farmer how much they earn a day, they're not going to be able to answer. It uses a set of simple proxy measures, like where do they drink water from, how many cows do they have, what kind of roof do they have, and that's a very simple, very practical tool in a lot of countries for assessing poverty. It takes about 10 minutes to administrate per questionnaire.
Okay, brilliant. If anyone wants to know more about the PPI, they can ask us. We can refer you to the Grameen Foundation and so on. Anyway, it's a tool. Let me see. Anastasia from USAID asks, how rigorous and valid can the evidence be without at least a quasi-experimental evaluation, i.e. a counterfactual to the intervention, which is, again, a question that a lot of people ask. Let me see. I think the typical results chain complexity is similar to the sort of thing that Alison was just presenting, and I would say in most cases it's almost impossible to do even a quasi-experimental evaluation, even to have a meaningful control group for the entire logic, for the entire intervention. What often can be done is to do something like that, to have some kind of control for individual steps within the logic, and probably in an ideal world one would do it for many of the steps within the logic, certainly the more questionable ones or the ones that are more open to challenge. I think the reality on the ground is often that programs don't have the resources to do that. It's obviously somewhat pricey to do it properly, and often it's also less necessary. I mean, I think the tools that you use to get at attribution vary a lot depending on what you're trying to, what you're actually looking at. And on our website, we have guidance around the attribution question that gives a matrix with a variety of possible tools, including quasi-experimental and randomized control trials and so on. But those are only 2 of 10 or 12 tools that can, in different circumstances, get convincingly at attribution and the counterfactual. If you're not very sure, then and you possibly can, then we obviously would recommend bringing in someone who's got expertise in this. Attribution is probably one of the toughest areas in the standard for someone who doesn't have any evaluation background, but it's something that everyone's learning about as we go along. Let me see. Next question. I hope that begins to answer your question. One for Alison, perhaps. Private sector incentives. What are the incentives for companies to participate? Alison, do you want to pick up on that?
Sure. I think this is a great question, and one that we battle with on a daily basis. So our private sector partners could be a big corporation, but they could also be a very small input retailer in a rural area. And our mantra is all about, first and foremost, looking at what it is that is already useful to our partners for them to be measuring. What is it that actually helps them improve their business? So this is where the line between intervention and results measurement can be a little bit blurry. In the case of a large private sector player, they probably already have a lot of information that they're already tracking. But in the case of maybe your small rural input retailer, we found that they don't actually even have basic records and can't keep track of their profits. So what we try and do is set in place, work with them in partnership to help them monitor what it is that is actually going to help them better understand and improve their business. So in this input retailer example, we actually tried a variety of methods. We looked at, keeping more detailed registers case by case of each of those transactions, but we found that it wasn't realistic. You frequently have people who maybe are semi-literate managing the shop, different people with their hands on the money at different points in time. So what we did is we went backwards and we looked a little bit at just having a stock in, stock out, and total sales for those partners. And we found that actually worked much better. And these partners are now able to see on a monthly basis, how much profit they're making, which was a win for them and was also a win for us. Now that's the pretty scenario. Sometimes you just need information, and the partners need to be able to comply and give you that information. So I think then it really becomes a case-by-case basis. We make sure that in our partnership agreements, we're very clear about the information that they're expected to provide, so we can go back to that. So we have our measurement plans created in line with those partnership agreements. And we also pay attention to the incentives. If we think we can encourage a partner to go a little bit above and beyond with their monitoring information, we will. But when that's not the case, then we take that burden upon ourselves, and we try and be practical about what it is that we can actually collect and the frequency at which we can collect it. So it's an ongoing negotiation, but we really like to try and start with what is the information these players are actually going to find useful for improving their own businesses.
Alison, thank you. A question from Halima Rahman saying, is it possible to explain attribution in simple layman's words? Yes, it is. Attribution is really getting at, when you've measured changes in key indicators, what makes you think that those changes are because of what you did, or what proportion of those changes that you've observed are because of you. That is quite tough to get at in some cases, and as I say, interestingly, in the evaluation community, there are other strands that have come to a similar place as the DCED standard. For instance, developmental evaluation in the United States, which has very little to do with international development. It's more come out of the, I think, the education community in Northern America, and they've ended up where the standard is now. But their solution, broadly speaking, is hire a specialist to hold your hand throughout the entire process. In international development programs, we tend not to have big budgets for things like that, so we're very much more around people in the field getting to grips with some of these concepts and some of the materials, and trying to provide as much as we can to help people through that process. But Halima, I have to say it's a steep learning curve for many people, and we just do what we can. So this whole question of how we make fairly technical evaluation terms more accessible is one we continue to work on. Let me see. I am going to pass the next question to Alison, I think, from Prativa to everyone. I've prepared an MRM plan in prescribed format and measured the mentioned indicator. Actually, I wasn't aware of a prescribed format, but anyway, there are commonly used formats, of course. How to keep track record of results tied up with MRM activities besides preparing the report of the measurement, which is a great question. How do you actually manage the numbers that you generate? So Alison or Adam, do you want to pick up on that?
I'm happy to take that. Yeah, I think that is a great question. Data management is always an issue, right? So the way that we do it within Grow is that we have our intervention management tool that I showed earlier, and that is attached to a specific intervention. We will have that MRM plan for that specific intervention. And then we will have a few indicators within that MRM plan, which are our log frame indicators. So our overall program log frame has something like about 10 indicators or so that are responsible for reporting against the donor. So we make sure that we bring those numbers together and aggregate them for reporting. Now you talk about, aside from the formal reporting, what we look at then is, because we have this central tool, this central template, we use the stoplight system, but we use that based on what we see in our quantitative indicators coming out of our MRM plan. But also, actually, one of the ways that we look at our results to make it very tangible and a part of the daily work of the team is that we take into account a lot of field observations. So we have a whole tab in our intervention management tool that's about what are the changes or concerns, risk factors, and other things that we're seeing in our market system with the market players or with our target beneficiaries. And so we have all of that information for each intervention located within one file. And then we review that on a quarterly basis when we come together and we have what we call a quarterly strategic review. Well, all of that information is supposed to be updated by the market analyst who is in charge of that specific intervention. And then we can all interrogate that intervention and look at what's working and what's not. We have those results there against the measurement plan. And then when it comes to aggregating that up to a higher level, then we pull the indicators from each individual IMT from each intervention and then aggregate them together for the log frame. Hope that answers your question.
Fantastic, thank you. Question from Peter. Is it a must for M4P programs projects to address all three, I guess for any project, to address all three universal impact indicators, income scale and employment promotion? So at the start of the standard, there are proposed 3 universal impact indicators. And the question from Peter is, are they obligatory or let's say just recommended? Adam, do you want to pick up on that?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. It's a really good question. So these are 3 impact indicators which are relevant for most M4P programs and most kind of interventions. And where it is relevant, then it is mandatory for them to be measured. Having said which, there are cases when it's not relevant. For example, if you are working with an intervention with smallholder farmers, jobs may just not be relevant at all. There may be no jobs created or no expectation of jobs created, and in that case, there's no expectation to measure it. Similarly, you might be, let me think of an example, there might be an intervention in business environment reform where there is such a long chain from the policy change to the additional income that to measure it would just not be feasible. So in this case, you need to, or the program needs to document why they're not measuring jobs, and if you have an audit, then the auditor will come examine your justification and make a judgment on whether it's appropriate or not.
Okay, thank you. Let's go, Alison, I wonder if you could pick up on Halima's question just posted to everyone. Should there be a single results chain for all interventions or different results chains for different types of intervention under the same project?
Sure, thanks. This is actually a very important tactical question. Where you define the edge of an intervention and how you define a results chain is actually something that can be a little bit challenging. So we have a results chain for each intervention. And I think that that's important because we have a complex and infinite world out there, right? But we need to be measuring things and managing things in such a way that it is concrete and controllable to some extent, although we look for these larger changes and try and think about how we're affecting broader systems. So we define an intervention as a set of activities that are seeking one market system change. So what is that change in the engine that we want to make? And then we expect that any intervention will make that change in the market engine that will then have a direct impact on our beneficiaries. And so those are our terms by which we define an intervention. And then each intervention will have its own results chain. We do then, at times, put together sector-level results chains, which are a little bit more theoretical, which talk about how the interventions interact, because they frequently do. And then we aggregate across our different interventions, as I mentioned, the information up to the log frame. And we do have, a visual for the whole program, but that, again, is at a very visual, at a very aggregate level. So really the results chain that's actionable and usable is the one that you define against that intervention. It takes one market system change that you can define, and which will then have an impact on your target beneficiary.
Okay, Alison, thank you very, very much. I think we are coming to the end of the hour. So I will propose that we put a recording of this hour online with the presentation. And if there are any questions we've missed somewhere along the way, I can see there's one or two still more coming in. We will aim to answer those online and email you with a link to the page once we've done that. Meanwhile, thank you very, very much for joining. It's been a very lively hour with quite a variety of questions, actually, and we certainly haven't quite answered them all. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you particularly to Alison and to Adam for preparing the presentations, and do please get in touch directly with the Secretariat if we can help you, or if you've really got any other question really around the standard. We should be able to answer quite quickly or put you in touch with someone who can. And meanwhile, we wish you every success in your work, and particularly in measuring the results of it. So good luck, and let's stay in touch. Thanks, and goodbye for now.